stop scrolling. I need you to listen to me very carefully right now. Not because I am trying to grab your attention with some dramatic headline, not because I want to waste the next 30 seconds of your life, but because what I am about to tell you tonight is something I have never said out loud to another human being, not to my closest friend, not to my therapist, not even to my own brother who I have known my entire life and who I trust more than almost anyone on this earth. I am only saying it now, here, tonight, to strangers on the internet, because I genuinely believe that somewhere out there, someone watching this right now is living inside a version of what I went through, and I think they need to hear that they are not alone. My name is Derek. I am 34 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I drive a 4-year-old Honda that needs new tires. I drink too much coffee. I work too many hours. I am, by every measure, a completely ordinary person living a completely ordinary life. And on a Wednesday night 14 months ago, I walked through my own front door after a long and exhausting business trip, relieved, hungry, ready to sleep in my own bed. And in the space of about 45 seconds, everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the woman I had chosen to spend my life with collapsed completely. I found my wife sitting on our bed, crying, with a man I had never seen before in my entire life. Now I know exactly where your mind just went. I know the story you are already writing in your head. I have been you. I was you, standing in that doorway, writing exactly that same story in my own head in real time. And I need you to stop right now. Because what was actually happening in that room was not what you think it was. It was not an affair. It was something so much more complicated than that, something more painful, something that even now, 14 months later, I am still untangling inside myself on a weekly basis in a therapist's office. I am going to tell you everything tonight, every single detail from the very beginning in the order it happened. But I need you to promise me one thing. Stay with me until the end, because this story has a twist, a real one. Not a cheap dramatic twist designed to keep you watching. A genuine, life-changing twist that completely reframed everything I thought I understood about my marriage, about my wife, and honestly, about myself. Are you with me? Good. Let's go back to the beginning. I want to paint you a picture of my life before that Wednesday night. A real picture. Not the version I would have posted on social media, not the version I told people at dinner parties. The real one, with all the details included, even the ones that are harder to admit. On the surface, and I mean right on the surface, the part everyone could see, my life looked genuinely good. Better than good. It looked like the kind of life that other people look at and feel a small, complicated pang of something that is not quite jealousy, but is adjacent to it. We had a house. Not a starter home, not a cramped apartment, but an actual house. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a backyard with a wooden deck that I had spent 3 weekends building myself the summer after we moved in. It was in a quiet suburb about 20 minutes outside of Nashville, the kind of neighborhood where people wave at each other from their driveways, where there is a farmer's market on Saturday mornings 3 blocks away, where the elementary school down the street has a good rating and the coffee shop on the corner knows your order before you finish walking through the door. We had 2 cars. We had a joint savings account that was healthy and growing. We had date nights every single Friday. Dinner somewhere we had never been before, or a movie, or just a long drive with good music and nowhere specific to go. We had friends who came over for dinner on Saturday nights and stayed until midnight arguing about things that did not matter and laughing until someone's eyes were watering. And at the center of all of it, there was Cassandra. I want to describe Cassandra to you properly because she matters to this story in a way that goes beyond being simply my wife or simply the person who did the thing I'm going to tell you about. She matters because she is one of the most genuinely remarkable human beings I have ever met, and I think that is important context for everything that follows. Cassandra was 32 years old when this happened. She worked as a marketing director for a mid-sized healthcare company downtown, a job she was genuinely excellent at. The kind of excellent where her colleagues talked about her in tones that were equal parts admiration and mild intimidation. She had a mind that could hold 20 things at once and sort them in order of importance faster than most people could identify what the things were. She was quick. She was quick. She was strategic. She saw angles that other people missed entirely. But she was also, underneath all of that sharpness, one of the warmest people I had ever known. She remembered things, not the big obvious things that everyone remembers, birthdays, anniversaries, but the small specific things that most people let slip through. She remembered that my colleague Marcus had a daughter starting kindergarten, and she would ask about her by name. She remembered that my mother preferred roses to any other flower and would always send them on her birthday without being reminded. She remembered the name of a waiter we had once at a restaurant we went to twice, 2 years apart, and greeted him by name the second time and watched his entire face transform. She was funny in a way that felt effortless. Not perform funny, not trying to impress funny, but genuinely, naturally funny. The kind where a single sentence from her could make a room full of people burst out laughing and she would already be moving on to the next thing before the laughter faded. I was completely, genuinely, unironically in love with this woman. We had met at a mutual friend's wedding 8 years before this story takes place. I was 26, she was 24. I saw her across the room at the reception and spent approximately 45 minutes trying to construct a reason to talk to her before our mutual friend finally took pity on me and introduced us. We talked for 3 hours that night. We exchanged numbers at 2 in the morning. I called her the next day, which I had been told was too soon, and she picked up on the second ring and said, without any preamble, that she had been hoping I would call. We dated for 2 years, slowly and carefully and well. I proposed at a small Italian restaurant that we both loved, not on a trip, not at some staged spectacular location, just at our regular table in the corner on a Thursday night in November. I had been carrying the ring in my jacket pocket for 3 weeks, waiting for the exact right moment, and when it arrived, I recognized it immediately and I did not overthink it. She said yes before I finished the sentence. Our wedding was exactly what both of us wanted. Small, outdoors, mountain backdrop in Colorado where she had grown up, 40 people who actually mattered to us, no more. No drama, no elaborate production, no seating chart controversies. Just two people making a public commitment to each other in front of the people they loved most, followed by dinner and dancing until the venue asked us to leave. I am telling you all of this because I need you to understand that what I had with Cassandra was not a mistake. It was not a relationship that had secretly been broken from the beginning and that I had simply been too naive to notice. It was real. It was good. We were, for the better part of 6 years, genuinely happy together. But there is always a but, isn't there? I work in corporate finance. I have worked in corporate finance since I was 23 years old. I am not going to pretend I did not know what I was signing up for when I took the job, because I did. Corporate finance means travel. It means being somewhere that is not home for significant stretches of time, regularly, without a lot of advance notice and without a lot of flexibility. Chicago, New York, Dallas, San Francisco, Boston, sometimes 2 trips in a single month, sometimes back-to-back trips with barely enough time at home to do laundry in between, conferences, client meetings, quarterly reviews, strategy sessions. There was always a reason to be somewhere else, and the reason was always legitimate, and it was always my job, and it was always, on some level, non-negotiable. Cassandra knew this about me before we got married. We had talked about it. She had said she understood, and I believe she meant it when she said it. But understanding something in the abstract and living with it in practice are two genuinely different things, and somewhere in the 3rd or 4th year of our marriage, I started to notice that the travel was becoming something other than just a logistical inconvenience. It was becoming a source of pain for her. Not dramatic pain, not the kind of pain that announces itself in fights or ultimatums or thrown dishes. The quiet kind. The kind that shows up in small comments scattered across weeks and months, delivered almost casually, almost as afterthoughts, in a tone that is carefully calibrated to not sound like an accusation, but that lands like one anyway. You are never here, Derek. I feel like I am living alone at this point. Do you even miss me when you are gone? I always felt guilty when she said these things. I always tried to fix it. Flowers when I got home, surprise dinner reservations, weekend trips to places she had mentioned wanting to go. I tried to compensate with attention and gestures for the time I could not give her. She always seemed to receive these things warmly. She always thanked me, she always kissed me and told me she loved me and said the trip sounded wonderful. But I noticed, if I am being completely honest with myself, and I am trying very hard to be completely honest in this account, I noticed that there was something underneath her warmth that I could not quite reach. Something I could gesture at, but not actually touch. Like trying to hold water in your hands, I told myself it was just the nature of the situation, that it would get better when the job settled down, that we were fine, that the foundation was solid even if the surface had some cracks. Looking back now, I wonder if I told myself those things because they were true, or because they were easier than asking the questions I was actually afraid to ask. Part 2. The Trip March. A Wednesday, Chicago. 3-day corporate conference, Monday through Wednesday. I had done this particular trip 4 times before. Same hotel, same conference center, same roster of client dinners and morning sessions and evening drinks with people I saw twice a year and could not have picked out of a lineup in between. I packed Sunday night. Cassandra made dinner while I packed. Pasta, nothing fancy, the kind of easy weeknight meal we had made 100 times. We ate together at the kitchen table. She asked about the conference agenda. I told her about it. We talked about plans for the following weekend. There was a concert she wanted to go to, a new restaurant that had opened downtown that someone at her office had recommended. It was a completely normal Sunday evening. I kissed her goodbye at the door Monday morning at 5:30. She was still in her pajamas, half asleep, her hair not yet done. She hugged me longer than usual, I remember that. She pressed her face into my shoulder for a moment before she let go. I texted her when the plane landed. She sent back a heart emoji. That was the last completely normal exchange we had. Monday and Tuesday at the conference were exactly what I had expected them to be. Relentlessly scheduled, mildly exhausting, occasionally useful. Back-to-back sessions during the day, client dinners in the evening that ran until 10 or 11, hotel room at midnight, up again at 6:30. The particular grind of the corporate conference circuit that sounds glamorous from the outside and feels like a very expensive form of jet lag from the inside. By Tuesday night, I was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed with my shoes still on and my jacket still on, too tired to properly get ready for sleep, staring at the wall and thinking about nothing specific except that I wanted to be home, wanted my own bed, wanted to wake up Wednesday morning in my own house, make coffee in my own kitchen, maybe go for a run in my own neighborhood. Wednesday morning, 6:03 a.m. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Flight notification. I picked it up, squinting against the brightness of the screen in the dark room. Cancelled. Severe weather system moving into Chicago. O'Hare was shutting down morning departures. All flights grounded until further notice. I lay there for a moment, just holding the phone and looking at the notification. Then I got up, got dressed, went downstairs, and joined the queue at the airline counter in the hotel lobby that had already formed with other stranded travelers, all of us wearing the same expression of resigned inconvenience. The woman behind the counter was efficient and apologetic in equal measure. She checked her system, looked at available options, and told me the earliest she could rebook me was a 7 p.m. departure out of O'Hare, which would get me into Nashville somewhere around 10 p.m. Fine. Annoying, but fine. I would lose a day at home, but it was one day. I took the rebooking confirmation, found a quiet corner of the hotel lobby with a reasonable Wi-Fi signal, and called Cassandra to let her know. 4 rings, voicemail. I left a message. Short, casual, the kind of message you leave when you assume the other person is in a meeting or away from their phone and will call you back within the hour. Hey, it's me. Flight got cancelled because of weather. I stood there for what was probably 30 seconds but felt much longer, having a very quiet and very urgent argument with myself about what I was doing and why, and what I thought I was going to find, and whether any of this was rational. Then I picked up my bag and walked up to my front door. I unlocked it with my key. I stepped inside. The living room told me a story the moment I stepped inside, before anyone spoke a word, and before I had fully processed what I was looking at. Two wine glasses on the coffee table, both of them used. One of them had a lipstick mark on the rim, a deep burgundy shade that I recognized immediately as Cassandra's, the one she had worn for years, the one that I associated so completely with her that seeing it in any other context would have made me think of her. The other glass was still mostly full, barely touched, as if the person holding it had been more occupied with talking than with drinking. The wine bottle was on the table beside them, red, uncorked, nearly empty. The television was on with the volume turned down low. Some crime documentary, blue and gray light flickering across the room. A show that neither of us had ever watched, that neither of us had any particular interest in. I set my travel bag down on the floor next to the door, quietly. Without thinking about it consciously, I was already moving carefully, already making less noise than I normally would, already operating in a mode that was somewhere between instinct and deliberate intention. I stood in the middle of my living room and I listened. The house was not silent. There were sounds coming from upstairs, from the direction of our bedroom at the end of the hall on the second floor. I could hear Cassandra's voice. I could not make out specific words, but I could identify the quality of it immediately. Low and thick, and broken in the specific way that a person's voice gets when they have been crying for an extended period of time. Not the sharp crying of a sudden shock. The deep, exhausted, I have been doing this for hours kind of crying, and underneath hers, barely audible from where I was standing, there was another voice. A man's voice, calm, measured, deliberate in its pacing, the way someone speaks when they are choosing each word carefully, when they are trying to manage someone else's distress. Not raised, not intimate, not the voice of someone who was there because they wanted to be there. The voice of someone who was there because they had a job to do. I stood at the bottom of the stairs with my hand on the banister, and I do not know how long I stood there. Long enough for my eyes to fully adjust to the light. Long enough to hear the voices go through several exchanges without being able to make out the content. Long enough for every scenario I had been turning over in my mind since noon to run through my head one more time, each of them feeling simultaneously more and less plausible than they had before. Then I started walking up the stairs. I went slowly, one step at a time, my hand trailing along the banister not for support, but because it gave me something to hold. I was not thinking clearly in any strategic sense. I was not planning what I would say or how I would react or what the protocol was for this specific situation, which was a situation I had no protocol for. I was just moving, my body doing the thing that felt like the next thing to do. The hallway at the top of the stairs was dim. The door to the spare room was closed, as it always was. The door to the bathroom was open, and at the end of the hall, the door to our bedroom, the room we had shared for 4 years, the room with the white curtains I had helped her hang and the reading lamp she had chosen and the photograph of our wedding on the wall above the dresser, was open. Not all the way. Maybe halfway. A warm stripe of yellow light fell across the hall floor from the gap. I walked to the door. I pushed it open all the way, and what I saw on the other side of that door was so different from what I had been bracing myself to see that for a moment I genuinely could not make sense of it. Like walking into a room and finding the furniture arranged in a configuration that your brain simply refuses to process as real for the first several seconds because it does not match any pattern you have stored. Cassandra was sitting on the edge of our bed. She was fully dressed. Dark jeans, the gray cashmere sweater I had given her for her birthday 2 years ago, her hair pulled back in a loose knot at the base of her neck. Her elbows were on her knees, Her face was buried in both of her hands, and she was crying in that specific, devastating way that means a person has gone far past the point of caring whether anyone can see them. The silent, shaking, shoulder dropping kind that looks like every part of the body is trying to fold inward toward the center. And sitting in the armchair in the corner of our bedroom was a man. The armchair was one we had found at a vintage shop in East Nashville about 2 years into our marriage. It was brown leather, a little worn, with wide arms. I used it to throw my jacket over at the end of the day. Cassandra used it to pile books she was meaning to read. It was, in every sense, a piece of furniture that belonged entirely to the private interior life of our marriage. And sitting in it, with his back straight and his hands resting on his knees, was a man I had never seen before in my life. He was around 50 years old, I would guess, possibly a few years either side. He was well dressed in a quiet way, a charcoal jacket, dark trousers, a watch on his left wrist that caught the light when he moved. His hair was dark going gray at the temples. He had a leather bag on the floor beside the chair, and across his lap there was an open folder of papers, though he was not looking at them. He was looking at Cassandra. He was not touching her. He was not leaning toward her. He was simply present, still and watchful and completely composed, in the manner of someone who is very accustomed to being in rooms with people who are falling apart and has learned that the most useful thing they can do in those moments is simply remain. Neither of them had heard me come up the stairs or push open the door. Cassandra heard the sound of the door hitting the wall at the extent of its swing. She looked up. I watched the color leave her face. I watched it happen in real time. A draining, a going white, a sudden and complete absence of whatever had been animating her expression before. Her hands dropped from her face. Her mouth opened and then closed again, and she made a sound that was not quite a word, and not quite a gasp, and not quite anything I could categorize. And across the room, the man in the armchair slowly and deliberately closed the folder in his lap. He looked up. He stood. He turned to face me fully. And what I saw in his expression was not guilt, was not the reflexive, caught-out panic of someone who knows they have been found doing something wrong, was not embarrassment or fear or the particular restless energy of a situation about to turn hostile. What I saw was relief, clear, genuine, thank God relief, the kind of relief a person shows when something they have been dreading has finally arrived and they can stop dreading it. He looked at me for a moment, and then he said, in a voice that was calm and direct and carried no apology, "Derek, thank God you are here. We need to talk. I want you to stay with that sentence for a moment." A man I have never seen in my life, sitting in my bedroom armchair at 10:30 at night, with my wife crying on the bed in front of him, and his first words to me, the first thing he says when he sees the husband walk through the door, are not an explanation, not a denial, not an attempt to diffuse the situation. They are an expression of relief, as if my arriving was something he had been hoping for, as if my arrival was, in some way, the answer to a problem. I stood in the doorway of my own bedroom, travel bag still on my shoulder, completely frozen, and I understood one thing with absolute clarity in that moment. Whatever was happening in this room, it was not the thing I had spent 3 hours on an airplane preparing myself to find. And somehow, in a way I could not yet articulate, that made it worse. The man's name was Richard Calloway. He told me this after a moment's pause, during which I had not moved from the doorway and Cassandra had not moved from the bed, and the three of us had existed in a tableau of perfect stillness that felt much longer than it probably was. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a business card, which he held out toward me with the calm practicality of someone who does this regularly. White card, clean design, his name in the center, a phone number and a P.O. box below it. Nothing else. No company name, no title, no frills. I took the card. I looked at it. I looked at him. He told me he was a private investigator, that he had been in business for 22 years, working primarily in the Nashville metropolitan area, that he was fully licensed and bonded, and that everything he did fell within the legal parameters of his profession. And then he told me who had hired him. He had not been hired by me, he had been hired by my wife. I want to give you a moment with that because I needed a moment with it when he said it. My wife had hired a private investigator, a professional, licensed investigator, to look into me, to investigate me, to build a file on the movements and behavior and activities of her husband. The man she had been married to for 6 years, the man she said she loved, the man who had in fact been doing nothing more sinister than attending corporate conferences and helping stranded co-workers and staying in the wrong hotel room because of a burst pipe, while I had been traveling. Every trip, every conference, every client dinner, every overnight stay in a hotel that all looked the same after a while. Cassandra had been running a parallel operation, quietly, without saying a word to me about it, without giving me any indication in any of our conversations or text messages or evenings at home together that she was doing anything other than going about her normal life. She had hired Richard approximately 6 weeks before this night. She had paid him a retainer. She had given him my work schedule, my travel itineraries, the names of the colleagues I traveled with. She had given him, in essence, everything he needed to build a comprehensive picture of what I was doing when I was not home, because she believed I was cheating on her. She had not arrived at this belief overnight. She had not been struck by a sudden, sourceless suspicion. She had, over a period of several months, accumulated a collection of small observations, none of them individually conclusive, all of them together painting a picture that had apparently become impossible for her to ignore. There was a hotel charge on our joint credit card statement from a trip to New York 3 months earlier. The charge was from a hotel that was not the conference hotel I had told her I was staying at. She had seen it when she was reviewing our monthly statements, which she did every month because she managed our household finances. She had not asked me about it. She had written it down. There was a contact in my phone named Priya M. who had sent me 2 text messages within the same week, about 6 weeks before this night. Cassandra had seen the name on my screen when I set my phone down on the kitchen counter while I went to answer the door. She had not asked me about it. She had written it down. There was a night, roughly 3 months before Richard was hired, when I had come home 2 hours later than I had told her I would. I had called to let her know I would be late. I had given her an explanation when I got home. The explanation was true, entirely, completely, verifiably true. But something in the way I delivered it had struck Cassandra as slightly off, slightly too rehearsed, slightly too complete. She could not have articulated precisely what had seemed wrong about it. But something had. She had not confronted me about any of these things. She had not asked me to explain any of them. She had not mentioned in any of our conversations over those months that she was scared or suspicious, or that she was lying awake at night building a case against me in her head out of a hotel receipt and a stranger's name and a delivery that had felt slightly too smooth. Instead, she had hired Richard, and Richard had spent 6 weeks doing what he was paid to do. He had followed me. He had documented my movements. He had cross-referenced my stated itineraries against my actual locations. He had run background checks on every name connected to my professional life that could plausibly have intersected with my personal one. He had examined financial records, the ones he had legal access to, and looked for patterns that did not fit the narrative of a straightforwardly faithful husband on business travel. He had been thorough. He had been methodical. He had done, by his own account, a complete and professional job. And he had found absolutely nothing. He handed me the folder. I sat down on the edge of the bed, not next to Cassandra, but at the far end, as much distance between us as the piece of furniture allowed, and I opened it. Photographs, time-stamped, location records cross-referenced with my stated itineraries, a log of every significant documented movement over 6 weeks. I went through it page by page. The hotel charge Cassandra had found on the credit card statement was from a trip to New York in January. The hotel she had found the charge for was the Kimpton Inc. 48 on the west side of Midtown Manhattan. The conference I had been attending was held at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square, which was where I had originally been booked. What I had not thought to mention to Cassandra, because it had seemed at the time like a minor logistical detail without any significance, was that the Marriott had experienced a significant water main issue on the second day of the conference and had needed to temporarily relocate guests to nearby hotels while the problem was addressed. I had been moved to the Inc. 48 for one night and had paid on our joint card without thinking twice about it. Priya M. was the name of a new executive assistant recently hired by one of my senior colleagues, a man named Daniel Chen, who I worked with closely and traveled with several times a year. I had Priya's number because she had taken over coordination of a client meeting that I was involved in and had needed to confirm several logistical details with me directly. We had exchanged approximately 8 text messages total, all of them entirely professional, about a conference call that had been rescheduled twice before finally happening. I had met her in person exactly once, in a conference room with 4 other people present for approximately 45 minutes. The night I came home late was a Thursday in December. My colleague Marcus, the same Marcus who had a daughter starting kindergarten, whose name Cassandra knew and asked about, had called me in a mild panic at 7:30 p.m. because his car had broken down on I-65 southbound, and his wife was out of town visiting her sister, and he had no one he could reach immediately. I had driven 40 minutes out of my way to sit with him on the highway shoulder in the dark until the tow truck arrived, then dropped him at his house, then driven home. I had not told Cassandra the full story when I got home because it was late, and she was most of the way asleep when I arrived, and it had seemed like a non-story. The kind of thing you mention eventually, when it comes up, without any particular urgency. Every item in the folder, every single one, had an explanation that was so ordinary, so completely devoid of drama or deception, that reading through them in sequence produced in me a feeling that I can only describe as a very quiet, very deep despair. Not because I was angry, not in that moment, but because I understood, looking at that folder, just how much fear Cassandra must have been carrying, how long she must have been carrying it, and how alone she must have been with it, since she had evidently decided that hiring a stranger to investigate me was preferable to simply asking me to explain a hotel receipt. I closed the folder. I put it on the bed beside me. I looked up at Cassandra. She was still crying, softer now, more depleted than distressed. She was looking at me with an expression that I had never seen on her face before in all the years I had known her, something between relief and devastation. The expression of a person who has been dreading a moment for a very long time and who is now inside that moment and discovering that it is both better and worse than they had imagined. Richard was still standing. He had given us a moment with the folder, and he was now looking at me steadily, and something in his posture told me that he was not finished, that there was more. And then he reached down. He reached into his leather bag. He removed a second folder, thinner than the first. He did not hand it to me immediately. He placed it on the foot of the bed, in the neutral space between Cassandra and me, and he looked at me with an expression that I found impossible to fully read. "Mr. Derrick," he said, "there is something else. Something I discovered in the course of this investigation that was not what your wife hired me to find. I want to be clear that she did not ask me to look into this, and I want to be equally clear that she did not know I had found it until I came here this evening and showed it to her approximately 2 hours ago." He paused for a moment. "I have been doing this work for 22 years, he said, "and I have thought carefully about whether what I found was something I had any right to share. My conclusion is that you have a right to know, and I believe, though I recognize I could be wrong about this, that knowing it is ultimately better for both of you than not knowing it." He looked at the folder on the bed between us. "I have told your wife the same thing," he said, "and I think you should look at this together." I looked at the folder, the thin folder, sitting on the white duvet of our bed, between my wife and me. I looked at Cassandra. She had stopped crying. She was looking at the folder with an expression that told me she already knew what was inside it, that she had already had her version of this moment 2 hours ago and was now waiting to have it again through my eyes. I reached out and picked it up. I opened the second folder. Inside were bank documents, statements, records, not mine, not jointly held, not anything I had ever encountered or been made aware of or had any reason to know existed. A personal savings account held at a regional bank with several locations across Middle Tennessee. Opened, according to the documentation, 4 years ago, in January, in Cassandra's name only. Her name, her signature on the account opening forms, her social security number, her contact information, a completely separate financial identity, running parallel to our shared life for 4 years, invisible to me. I looked at the date it was opened. January 4 years ago. We had been married for 2 years when she opened this account. We had been living in our house for 14 months. We had just come back from a vacation to Portugal that we had planned and saved for together over the course of almost a year. We were, by any measure, in the middle of building something together. And in January of that year, Cassandra had opened a private bank account that she never told me about. I turned to the transaction history. The transfers in were regular but deliberately irregular, if that makes sense. Regular enough to maintain and grow the balance. Irregular enough in their timing and specific amounts to avoid the kind of automatic pattern recognition that might flag unusual activity on a shared account. Amounts ranging from $250 on the low end to occasionally $2,000 or $3,000 on the higher end moved from our joint account into this private one in a rhythm that was carefully calibrated to be invisible. I went through the statements page by page. I did the arithmetic as I went, though I made myself do it twice because I did not believe the number the first time. Over 4 years, Cassandra had transferred $94,320 into this account. I put the folder down on the bed. I sat there for a moment and looked at nothing. $94,000, nearly $100,000, moved over 4 years, quietly, carefully, invisibly from our shared life into a separate one that I knew nothing about. The room was very quiet. I could still hear, faintly, the television playing downstairs. I looked at my wife. She was looking back at me, directly finally, without looking away, and what I saw in her face was not defiance, was not the hardened expression of someone who has been caught doing something they will defend. It was something much more exposed than that, something much more frightened. "Tell me," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected it to, and she told me. She talked for a long time. I did not interrupt her. I let her say everything she needed to say, in whatever order it came out, without redirecting or questioning or asking for clarification. I just sat at the end of our bed and listened to my wife say things she had apparently been unable to say to me for years. She told me about her parents. Her parents had married young. Her mother at 20, her father at 22. They had stayed married for 27 years. From the outside, their marriage had looked functional. They had a house, 2 children, regular family vacations, the baseline markers of a stable domestic life. From the inside, from the perspective of Cassandra growing up inside that house, it had been something considerably different. Her father was not a violent man. He was not cruel in any obvious, demonstrable way. He was, in the assessment of everyone who knew them, a decent person. But he was also, in the way that some people of his generation and background were, someone who had assumed without examination that the financial dimension of their marriage was his domain and his alone. He controlled the money, not through threats or explicit prohibition, but through the simple practical fact that all the accounts were in his name and he managed them, and Cassandra's mother had, over the course of their marriage, never developed any independent financial identity at all. She did not have her own accounts. She did not have her own credit history. She had no savings that were hers, no financial resources that existed outside of her relationship with Cassandra's father. After 20 years of marriage, she was, in the most concrete practical sense, completely dependent on him for everything. When Cassandra was 11 years old, her mother left. Not permanently, as it turned out. She left for 3 weeks. She took Cassandra and her younger brother to her sister's house and stayed there for 21 days while she tried to figure out what came next. Cassandra remembered those 3 weeks with extraordinary clarity. The fold-out couch at her aunt's house, the school she was briefly enrolled in, the meals that were slightly different from the ones at home, the quality of the light in the mornings in her aunt's kitchen. And then her mother came back. She came back not because she had changed her mind about wanting to leave. She came back because she had nowhere to go and no means to get there. After 3 weeks of trying to figure out what an independent life might look like for her, she had concluded, correctly, given the reality of her situation, that she did not have the financial foundation to build one. She had no money of her own. She had no credit of her own. She had skills and intelligence and capability, but she had, over 20 years of marriage, been systematically, if unintentionally, stripped of the independent resources that would have allowed her to act on them. So she came back through the front door with her suitcase and her children and her defeated expression. And she stayed in her marriage for another 7 years until Cassandra's father eventually left for someone else, at which point her mother was 50 years old with no independent financial history and had to build one from nothing, which she did slowly and painfully over the following decade. Cassandra had watched all of this. She had been 11 when her mother tried to leave. She had been 18 when her father left. She had watched every stage of it. The dependency, the trap, the return, the eventual abandonment, the long, slow reconstruction. And something had lodged in her because of it. Something that had not gone away when she grew up. Something that had not gone away when she became financially independent herself. Something that had not gone away when she met me or fell in love with me or decided to trust me enough to marry me. A fear. Not of me specifically. Not of our marriage specifically. Not of anything she could point to in our actual relationship and say, this is the thing I am afraid of. This specific thing that this specific person has done. Just a fear of dependency, of being the woman her mother was, of having a life that was real and good and full of things she valued and then discovering, at some point when it was too late to easily change it, that she had no way out if she needed one, that she had no door, that she had allowed herself to become trapped by the very love she felt. She called it her safety net. That was the phrase she used. My safety net, said quietly, with a kind of tired precision, as if she had been rehearsing how to explain this for a very long time, and had finally arrived at the version she thought was most accurate. It was not money she planned to spend. It was not a fund she was building toward a specific departure. It was not evidence of a plan to leave me, or a secret second life, or a relationship with someone else, or any of the things a hidden bank account might more conventionally suggest. It was $94,000 of pure fear, sitting quietly in an account she never touched, earning modest interest, existing solely as a guarantee that if she ever found herself in the position her mother had found herself in, loving someone, committed to someone, and then discovering that the commitment had ceased to be mutual, she would not be trapped. She had never spent a single dollar of it, not once, not a withdrawal, not a transfer, not a single purchase. The account had never been used for anything except to exist, to accumulate, to be the thing that, if everything else failed, meant she had options. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think the honest version is more useful than the clean version. I felt many things simultaneously, and they did not arrange themselves neatly. I felt something like relief. My wife had not cheated on me, had not been building a secret life, had not been lying to me about the fundamental nature of our relationship in the ways I had been half preparing myself for since noon. I felt something like grief for the women Cassandra's mother had been, for the little girl Cassandra has been watching her, for the fact that the fear that had grown from that experience had apparently been so persistent and so powerful that it had survived everything that was genuinely good between us. I felt something like anger, quieter than I expected, but present, real, Because $94,000 and 4 years of secrecy is not a small thing, even when the intention behind it was not malicious, even when I understood the fear, even when I felt, in the same breath as the anger, something that was genuinely close to compassion. And I felt something else, something that took me longer to name and that I want to tell you about, because it is the part of this story that matters most. I felt recognized, not in a good way, in the way that a mirror sometimes shows you something you did not know you were carrying. Because while Cassandra was telling me about her fear, her secret, her safety net, the thing she had been holding alone for 4 years because she did not know how to say it out loud, I was sitting there recognizing something in it that I had not expected to recognize. I was sitting there recognizing myself. Richard left around midnight. He packed his folder and his bag with quiet efficiency, shook my hand at the door, a firm handshake, held a beat longer than strictly necessary, that said something I did not have words for, and walked out to his dark blue Audi. I watched his taillights disappear around the corner, and then I closed the front door and went back inside and sat down on the couch across from Cassandra. We talked until 3 in the morning, not fighting, not in the way I might have predicted we would be, given the circumstances. Something different, harder in some ways, more necessary. The kind of conversation that two people have when all the usual protective structures have been removed and there is nothing left to do but be honest. She said everything she had not been able to say before. About the fear, about her mother, about the night, 2 years into our marriage, when she had been lying awake at 3 in the morning while I was in San Francisco, looking at the ceiling, and had thought, if this ended tomorrow, what would I have? And had felt, suddenly and terrifyingly, that the answer was less than she needed it to be. She had not thought she was planning to leave me. She had not, in any conscious sense, believed that our marriage was going to end. But the thought had frightened her so thoroughly that instead of telling me about it, instead of saying, "Derek, I had a scary thought last night and I need to talk about it," she had gone online the next day and researched how to open a personal savings account. She had never told me because she was ashamed. She was ashamed of the fear, and she was ashamed that the fear had expressed itself in secrecy, and she was ashamed, most of all, that some part of her had apparently decided that hiding money from her husband was a more manageable problem than asking him to help her feel less afraid. And somewhere around 1 in the morning, she said the thing that stopped me completely. She said, "Derek, I hired someone to follow you because I was scared of what you might be doing. And the whole time I was so focused on what you might be hiding from me, I never once stopped to ask myself why I was hiding something from you." That sentence. I have thought about that sentence every day since she said it, because she was right in a way that went beyond the obvious. And the reason she was right in that deeper way was because it applied to me too. Not the money, not the investigator. I had not done those things, but I had been hiding something. I had been hiding the fact that for the past 2 years, maybe longer, I had felt increasingly quietly disconnected from my own marriage. I had felt the distance between Cassandra and me growing, millimeter by millimeter, so slowly that I had almost convinced myself it was not happening. I had felt lonely in a way that I did not know how to admit, because admitting it would have meant acknowledging that something was wrong. And acknowledging that something was wrong would have meant having the conversation about what the something was. And that conversation felt so large and so potentially destructive that I had simply chosen, again and again and again, not to have it. I had booked extra business trips sometimes, not because I needed to, because it was easier to be somewhere else than to be home and feel the distance and not know how to close it. I had hidden this too, from myself as much as from her. We had built a life together that looked, from every external angle, like something solid and good and worth having. And inside that life, both of us had been quietly and separately carrying fears that we had never once shared with the person who was supposed to be our partner. She was terrified of being trapped. I was terrified of the conversation that might reveal how far apart we had drifted. We had been hiding the same fear from opposite directions. Here is what happened after that night. Cassandra transferred every dollar, every cent, the full $94,320 plus the interest it had accumulated, back into our joint account within the week. We did not do this quietly or without discussion. We sat at our kitchen table with a financial advisor and we restructured everything from the ground up. A joint account with complete transparency and shared access, individual personal accounts for each of us, equal in their initial balance, that belonged to us separately and that we could each use without explanation or justification. Not because either of us felt we needed a secret, but because having resources that were individually ours was, we both agreed, actually sensible and healthy. A system built on destructive that I had simply chosen, again and again and again, not to have it. I had booked extra business trips sometimes, not because I needed to, because it was easier to be somewhere else than to be home and feel the distance and not know how to close it. I had hidden this too, from myself as much as from her. We had built a life together that looked, from every external angle, like something solid and good and worth having. And inside that life, both of us had been quietly and separately carrying fears that we had never once shared with the person who was supposed to be our partner. She was terrified of being trapped. I was terrified of the conversation that might reveal how far apart we had drifted. Acknowledgement rather than fear. We started therapy, both individually and together. Our couple's therapist was a woman in her 50s with an office near Vanderbilt who had, she told us in our first session, heard a great many things in 20 years of practice. She did not seem surprised by our story. She seemed to find it, if anything, relatively straightforward. Two people who loved each other and had both, for different reasons and in different ways, gotten very practiced at not saying the things they most needed to say. I cut my travel schedule substantially. I did not do this because Cassandra asked me to, though she might have eventually. I did it because I wanted to be home. Because for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, being home did not feel like something I was failing at, but had not yet found the right way to address. It felt like somewhere I wanted to be. Are we fixed now? No. I want to be honest about that. We are not fixed. We are better. We are more honest with each other than we have ever been, in ways that are sometimes uncomfortable and occasionally genuinely painful, and consistently more valuable than the alternative. We are in therapy and we are doing the work, as they say, which is an expression that used to make me roll my eyes, and that I now understand to mean simply, we are having the conversations instead of not having them. Trust, once it has become as complicated as ours became, does not recover on a schedule. It does not respond to effort in a linear way. It has good days and harder days. It requires, it turns out, a great deal of patience and a particular willingness to keep showing up even when showing up is uncomfortable. But we are still here. Before Richard left that night, before that firm handshake at the door, he said something I have thought about many times since. He said that in 22 years of doing this work, he had assembled a great many files on a great many people, and that in most cases, those files contained something that ended things, a confirmation of what the person who hired him had feared, a truth that, once known, could not be put back. He said ours was the first file he had assembled that contained, instead of the feared truth, a different truth, one that had not been there at the outset, one that he had stumbled across sideways, one that neither of the people most directly affected had fully reckoned with before that night. I asked him what he thought the truth was. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said that you were both hiding from each other, and that neither of you knew the other one was doing the same thing. My name is Derek, and if any part of what I have told you tonight felt familiar, if any piece of it sounded like something you recognize from inside your own life, I want you to leave a comment below. I read every single one, everyone. If you are new here, please subscribe. New stories every week. And one last thing before I go, the conversation that could have prevented all of this. The one about the fear, about the distance, about what we were both quietly carrying. That conversation was available to us at any point during the 4 years that account was open. At any point during the years, I was quietly booking extra business trips to avoid the silence between us. We did not have it because we were both afraid of what it might reveal. Do not do that. Whatever it is that you have been not saying to the person you have chosen to build a life with, whatever fear you have been managing alone, whatever distance you have been pretending not to notice, it is not getting smaller on its own. And a stranger in a bedroom chair is a much harder way to find out than a conversation. I will see you next time